Good evening, everybody. We are coming to you from the Central Branch of Kitchener's Public Library, broadcasting another Town Hall edition of TVO Today Live. Tonight, a debate looking at the intersection of social media and how it's affecting the future of democracy. From foreign governments trying to use social media as a tool of disruption to free speech and democratic movements, we'll cover all that as our debaters try to win the hearts and minds of our audience, both here in Kitchener and at home. Tonight, our social media undermining democracy. That's TVO Today Live, generously supported by the Wilson Foundation. Okay, we're going to introduce our debaters to you this evening. Joining us on the yes side are Samantha Bradshaw, Assistant Professor in New Technology and Security at American University's School of International Service and a Fellow at CIGI, the Center for International Governance Innovation here in Kitchener-Waterloo. Incidentally, you were born and raised here, weren't you? Yes, you were. And Fitz-Gerald is also here. She's the director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs and a professor of political science at Wilfred Laurier University, also here in KW. Arguing for the no side, Robbie Suave is senior editor at Reason Magazine and the host of the political news show Rising on Hill TV's YouTube channel. He's also the author of Tech Panic, Why We Shouldn't Fear Facebook and the Future. And Jeff Jarvis is here. He is director of the Town Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the City University of New York's Newmark School of Journalism. And how about we welcome them to Kitchener-Waterloo this evening? There we go. Okay, I want to start by saying you guys have got a job ahead of you to do this evening. And I'll tell you why. Because we polled this audience just before we started the program, and we wanted to get people voting on whether they believe, yes or no, social media are undermining the future of democracy. And you've got a home field advantage off the top here. 74% of those surveyed said yes, social media are undermining the future of democracy. 74%. 26% said no, it's not. Now, the winner of tonight's debate isn't necessarily the team that gets the majority of the votes. It's the team that moves the majority of the votes. So the heat's still on you guys. You've got a hometown advantage, but the heat's still on. Because our audience is going to hear the debate, and then we'll vote at the end, and we'll see who's moved whom at that point. Now, let's begin our first round. We're going to have 4 minutes to each of you for opening statements. Samantha Bradshaw from Team Yes, you got the first 4 minutes, so it's over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. As you mentioned, I grew up here in Kitchener-Waterloo, and I'm probably one of the last people who grew up here without being connected to a ubiquitous internet. I have fond memories of my brother teaching me how to use our first family computer, and much to my parents' dismay, I probably spent way too many hours on that thing. I'm sure, they're in the audience right now. They can tell you that they probably thought I was going to drop out of school at one point just to play video games all day. But, the internet, it gave me this wonderful opportunity. It gave me a chance to play and to learn, to connect, to create, to discover, and to imagine. And the reason why I wanted to start here today is because as an academic who thinks a lot about social media and new technologies, I'm increasingly troubled by the current trajectory of today's online environment. I feel like I've become a product in today's digital world, and a product in an environment that is characterized by surveillance, attention, and addiction. Today, proprietary algorithms curate our entire online experience. And rather than promoting content that brings us together, that allows for empathy and deliberation, we're increasingly polarized. The attention economy incentivizes clicks that attract and persuade us based on virality, opposed to veracity. And social media is increasingly this place that's filled with trolls who, hiding behind this veil of anonymity, bully, harass, and prey on individuals who are different instead of celebrating our diversity. Sometimes the people behind these accounts aren't even real, but they're automated scripts designed to mimic human behavior, generating this false sense of consensus around a particular idea or movement. This isn't an ecosystem that brings the world closer together, as one of Facebook's mottos might suggest, but it's one that increasingly divides us and segments us based on our identities, our values, and our beliefs. What I want you all to consider tonight is how the business models of social media platforms are in contention with processes of democracy, human security, and individual well-being. Platforms have prioritized the growth of their user base in the interest of their shareholders, rather than the security and safety of their actual users. By moving fast and breaking things, companies have allowed for hate and for extremism to go unchecked on their platform, leading to events like what we recently saw in the US with riots at the Capitol building on January 6th. And by monitoring our behavior online, platforms have given digital authoritarians a powerful tool for surveillance, suppression, and the silencing of digital activism and dissent around the world. While the problems I've described here aren't necessarily new to social media and to the digital era, these technologies act as powerful amplifiers and accelerants. The globally ubiquitous nature of these platforms and their seamless integration into almost every aspect of our daily lives make these problems systemic and something that can't be ignored. Yet the rules that social media companies have set about when they take down content, how they moderate these decisions, often happen in black boxes with little accountability, but enormous implications for human rights and democracy.
You have set a perfect example of finishing right on time. Everybody take note. That's great. Samantha, thank you. Robbie Suave, 4 minutes to you. Get us started.
Sure. So to consider the position that our opponents are taking here, I want to read a quote that I think encapsulates it from the Dutch sociologist Ernest van den Haag, who said of social media, it is taken, complaining about social media, it is taken everywhere from seashore to mountaintop, and everywhere it isolates the bearer from his surroundings, alienates us from each other, from reality, and from ourselves. So I just lied to you. He did not say that about social media. He said that about the radio in 1963, which goes to show you that there have been complaints about the terrible effect that the new communications technology is having on us since the beginning of time. In my lifetime, there was a panic over violent video games, how they were making everyone more violent. It turned out there's absolutely no research to suggest that violent video games make young people more violent. In fact, young people already predisposed toward violence probably have a healthier way to satisfy that impulse instead of engaging in real violence. This was true of the TV, which was supposed to make us all lazy and indolent, of radio, which newspapers crusaded against because it was competitive with their own industry. The New York Times, back in the 19th century, called for the inventor of the telegram. Something must be done. Hopefully it involves a noose. Honestly, that was in the New York Times. You can go back to the 17th century, where Samuel Pepys, who wrote the famous diary about the Great Fire in London, in his diary he laments that the pocket watch is addictive, and people will not know where they're walking to anymore because they can't take their eyes off their screens. Plato complained that the written word was going to end the need to memorize things. We can go back to prehistory to find people worried about the new communications tool. And I get it. I get why that is. New stuff is scary, and it changes society, and not all changes are good. But I think we have to put this question in perspective. Democracy is messy. The free exchange of information is hard. We disagree, and we disagree passionately. In the US, we disagree extremely passionately. You're all very polite here in Canada, I've found. But there's intense disagreement on what the right policies are. Social media has better facilitated us having those disagreements. We are far more knowledgeable than we were before social media. I know we talk about it's just for extremists, and it's just making us all dumber. That's not actually borne out by social psychology research. People have gotten smarter over time. They have better access to both good information and bad information. You used to be able to better gatekeep the media forces, newspapers, cable news, TV, whatever the previous thing was, used to be able to stop you for consuming things that they didn't agree with and they didn't think were good for society. But is that really democracy? I don't think it is. I think that's tyranny. I think you're more likely to have tyranny and actual ignorance when you don't have a robust exchange of ideas going on, which is what's facilitated by social media. It's not always pretty. I'm sure it can be improved various ways by various different policies. Sometimes the social media companies are thinking through some of these. Google, for instance, when it realized it was steering people down some rabbit holes toward more extremism, they tweaked that policy. And now it is far more likely, if you're surfing YouTube, if you happen to be an extremist, this is borne out by social psychology research, you're more likely to stumble across content that is aimed at de-radicalizing you. Far more likely than you are not a radical person and you're being steered down some rabbit hole. We need to think about who are the voices in our society calling for more regulation of social media and who are the anti-social media forces. Invariably, they are people who serve the previous media incarnation, newspapers, TV. I mean, you talk about undermining democracy. Cable news channels in the US are like 24 hours a day propaganda commercials for and against certain policies and certain candidates. On social media, you are more likely to find dissent and disagreement than you are in other media forms or than you are in real life. The most siloed people are people with no access to social media who only know what the other people, their neighbors, their friends, family think about things.
Robbie, thank you very much. That's one for the no side. Let's go back to the yes side, and it's back to you.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everyone. I think social media is undermining our democracy, and it's doing so in three ways. First of all, it's undermining what I'd call the commons. In a diverse democracy, especially that which exists in North America, we rely on the commons. That's where our common values lie. That's where we come together to discuss the most optimal outcomes and the most optimal democratic outcomes, policy outcomes. So algorithmically propelled narratives, which include disinformation, conspiracy theories, and propaganda, and there's been research on this, really disaggregate groups and even give rise to groups that are made up of very few people, but which have a much, much louder voice than is actually the case in reality. And this undermines the commons, and we have to rely on that commons to come together for the collective good. Secondly, it is destructive to our institutions. Virtually all institutions at the moment are under attack. The list is endless. And they are under attack in a way that makes it very, very difficult for even the most sophisticated institutions to respond to. And that is due to both the volume and the intensity of the criticisms that come at institutions. I support the criticism of institutions. We've always had criticism towards institutions, but institutions are just swamped now. They do not have time to generate new policies, consider new policies in response to what the people want. So these institutions get weakened dramatically, and even reasonable voices that try to stand up for the institutions get the venom propelled back to them. Now, this has an impact on leaders, is right? Because it comes at a very high personal cost for them to stand behind their institutions these days. So weakened institutions, weakened leadership, it leads to, in some cases, the abandonment of institutions. And these institutions must be regarded as the cornerstone of our democracies and the institutions that we really must have faith in. Lastly, it is crippling to individuals. Unregulated social media has led to unprecedented levels of attacks on individuals. There's ample evidence out there of the breakdown of marriages, relationships, families, work relationships. The list is endless, that have been destroyed by the ungoverned spread and amplification of narratives which include propaganda, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. Micro-attacks on individuals are rampant today, and being a representative from the academic community, we are one of those groups that are getting really targeted. The attacks are relentless, and the groups behind these attacks are sometimes very well organized and very well resourced. And the aim is to wear down the individual until they withdraw from the platforms. This is self-censoring, so it's undermining freedom of speech. If the individual remains strong and withstands these attacks, the effort moves to their institutions to publicly shame them, or in some cases to make efforts to weaponize institutional processes and try to get rid of them. So we see a lot of micro-targeting going on, businesses, family members as well. The Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger and his wife serve as an example. And these digital silencing and intimidation tactics are devoid of any accountability.
Thank you, Ann. Right to time again. We're doing well on that front. Jeff Jarvis, 4 minutes to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Social media is not destroying democracy. It is expanding democracy. It is bringing into the conversation communities who were for too long ignored, underserved, and forgotten in mainstream mass media, run, by the way, by people who look like me, old white men. Social media has been used to build movements of social justice and equity through hashtags. Black Lives Matter, I Can't Breathe, Oscars So White, Me Too, Occupy Wall Street. They've brought attention to things that media were frankly ignoring for too long. In United States terms, the net, in my view, is the substantiation of the First Amendment. It not only brings the freedom of the press, now that everyone has one in their hands, but also the freedoms to assemble and to act. Now, more than that, social media is a place for community. I had the privilege a few weeks ago of playing host to a Black Twitter Summit at my journalism school at the City of New York. And what I learned there is that the people who've been on Black Twitter value it as a place where they can be themselves and not be under white gaze, with their daily joys and their daily sorrows. That's even more important in some ways than the movements. Now, meanwhile, media are attacking social media and in a moral panic around the net. They're blaming it for all of our troubles, as if a few years ago we were all just peachy. We had no problems of racism and hatred and inequity. Somehow the internet and Facebook made it all bad for us. Of course, that's absurd. In their coverage of social media, journalists do not acknowledge the competition that social media is in their eyes. How social media, in their view, has stolen their audience, their attention, and their advertisers, as if God gave those old companies that in the first place. Neeraj Weisblatt is a researcher who looked into when coverage of social media shifted from the utopian to the dystopian. It used to be that Silicon Valley was the darling, now it is the devil. It happened, she found, at a very specific moment in time, the election of Donald Trump, because media wanted someone else to blame for what they hold responsibility for. And so a panic ensued about disinformation, fake news, hate speech, and so on. But since then, sober research has shown that there's a different picture of this reality, debunking the claims, for example, that we're all in echo chambers and filter bubbles. The Oxford Reuters Institute says that a clear majority view in academic research is that echo chambers that exist are small. In one study in the UK, 2% on the left, 5% on the right. Danish scholar Michael Bong-Petersen found that instead of putting us into echo chambers, social media essentially breaks down echo chambers, which I know sounds reversed, but what he's saying is that we live in a filter bubble in our real lives, in a comforting bubble, and then we come online and we are exposed to people who are strange to us, who we may not like, we may hate. And social media gives us the spitballs to then fire. Peterson found that people who share fake news do so because they have a need for chaos. And finally, social media polarizing us? Well, not so much. A New York Times editorial in 2017 by 3 researchers said that they found the devil in polarization, and it is television. Especially in the United States, we watch 5 times more television than social media for our news. Fox News has been a disaster for us, and media as a whole put us into binary buckets and set us against each other, red versus blue, white versus black, 99% versus 1%. Media bear responsibility for what is happening. And what concerns me most here is that when we get to bad regulation, like we have a new law in Utah just now, the speech of all of us will be affected. It's not just the few who are causing trouble, it's the speech of every one of us that matters.
Thank you very much. I think we should give him a round of applause. We're off to a great start here. Well done. Good stuff. All right, having made your 4-minute opening statements, I'm now going to give each of you a chance for a 2-minute response to something you heard from the other side. So your chance to rebut. Samantha, 2 minutes to you up first.
Ooh, Whew, 2 minutes, that's real fast. I got a lot to say. All right, to start off, yes, these problems are not new. I even mentioned that in my opening remarks. We've been thinking about challenges that new media have raised for problems around misinformation, propaganda, polarization for years, for as long as people have been trying to sway one another of something. But there are unique affordances of social media platforms, unique features that make these challenges especially perverse and dangerous to our democracies. Take, for example, algorithms as the new gatekeepers. So, as I wanted to emphasize in my opening remarks, the ways that these technologies are designed to promote or demote certain kinds of information shape our entire ecosystem. And algorithms have replaced the traditional gatekeepers, the journalists, the media editors, and they're not designing information around things that would be good for democracy, but things that increase the bottom lines of companies. What tends to increase the bottom lines of companies is negative content, emotional content, things that make us angry, that make us afraid. These kinds of content are not necessarily good for democracy. I'd also like to point out the fact that greater access to information isn't the only core tenet of democracy. We also have to be able to come together to deliberate. And the more information that's out there, it can lead to a bunch of different challenges for democracy. I'll focus a little bit on the polarization research because Jeff brought up a really great point about echo chambers and how they don't really exist on social media. We often see a diverse range of news and information on social media. That's actually what contributes to a lot of the affective polarization in today's society. I'm exposed to negative content about the opposite political party, and that makes me angry and double down.
Thank you, Samantha. I always debate with myself whether I should be ruthless in looking at the clock or just let you finish the sentence. Okay, that's Samantha. Robbie, your rebuttal, 2 minutes to you.
Sure. I mean, it comes down to, I think a lot of what she just described is good. I think that the traditional gatekeepers and their stranglehold on the discourse being utterly broken, being smashed against the rocks is a good thing. There were lots of bad public policies here and in the US that were arrived at because no one thought to question whether, for instance, invading Iraq was a good idea. I mean, some people questioned it, but they weren't able to get that message out. The media was in lockstep with the government, and there was no one to hold them accountable. Now you will hear things all the time on social media. You can say things. Sometimes they're wrong. I think that's fine. I think that's how democracy works, how it should work. The algorithms are doing nothing, it's more sophisticated, but it's not fundamentally different than what this library does. I saw that all the cooking-related books in the back were grouped in the same place to help you find them. If you like this cooking book, you might like some of these. That's all they're trying to do. The idea that social media has financial concerns that traditional media companies don't have is to me laughable. That same goal to maximize profits is true of the New York Times or Fox News or CNN or your local news station that for all of time has operated under if it bleeds, it leads kind of thinking, and which has, by the way, contributed to tons of misinformation in our society about how prevalent violence and crime is and how that affects policies. Again, the media before social media was doing that. I think it's important to drill down a little bit on what the professor mentioned about the misinformation stuff relating to the election. So much bad commentary from the mainstream media on the 2016 election saying that misinformation on social media was the reason Donald Trump was elected. The New York Times and the Washington Post beat this drum day after day after day. It is substantially just not true. The Russian bots on Facebook, I'm sure you've heard about them. Tiny number of users that were seen by a tiny number of other people. We're talking about swing voters in 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, changing their mind. Working class people, like, it wasn't because of Facebook. They listened to a lot of talk radio and watch cable news.
Thank you, Robbie. Anne, over to you for your 2 minutes.
Thank you. I am supportive of access and freedom of access and freedom of voices. The yes side is not about changing the laws or changing freedom of speech. It's about bringing balance to that careful balance that we have between freedom and responsibilities. And you mentioned the printing press 500 years ago, Robbie. That sort of thwarted us. It brought about the need for laws concerning publishing, plagiarism, libel, and we had to do some backfill to restore that balance between freedoms and responsibility. So complete freedom of speech without recourse, I disagree. If my son or any one of my children spews hate speech in a certain setting, I would expect him to be held to account. If he's at school, detention, suspension. If he's at home, the naughty step. But he can't just recreate himself and reappear in that privileged setting again instantaneously. So free speech without condition has no balance in my view. It's like a bike. A bike with no balance falls over. A system with no balance crashes. So I think that the other thing we have to remember here is democracy ensures one vote for one person. And it's really the system of the commons to promote democratic outcomes, to encourage people to have faith in the institutions, to encourage them to vote. That produces the best democratic outcome. But our system also, whilst it doesn't force people to go to the ballot box, it protects the country from ballot stuffing. And the way social media is working at the moment does not protect us from ballot stuffing. So this is where things are breaking down, and for me, it has nothing to do with freedom of speech.
Anne, thank you very much. And Jeff, you're going to wrap up with your 2 minutes this section.
So, Anne, since you already threw your own son under the bus, I'll back it up at once here and say that yes, he's responsible, and that's just the point. He's humanly responsible for what he does. We have met the enemy, and it is us. It is not technology. It is not machines. It is the ill in our own society that we carry into this medium from our past. It is the inequity and the hatred and the racism that we bring with us that matters. So to blame the technology is to stop us from dealing with these core issues in society. You said, Anne, that it's disruptive to the institutions. What's disruptive is the far right in the United States, the truckers in Ottawa, the people who want to burn down the institutions of society rather than share them with those who follow. That is the bigger problem that we have to deal with in society, and we can't just blame it on this easy target. Samantha, you mentioned the business models that you find to be problematic. Well, those are the business models that media invented, and that got carried over to the internet. The business model of attention is the one that we created. I think we have to change that. But what we see in the early days of media, I have a book coming out on Gutenberg, so it's dear to my heart, is that the response at first is to try to control it and stop it, and that doesn't work. Ask the Vatican and its index of forbidden books that all became bestsellers. So what matters here more than anything else, I think, is that we must take responsibility for what's happening in society. We can't imagine that if you turned off the internet tomorrow, do we possibly think that everything would be fine, everything would be better, it would go back to some wonder? Or what, it would go back to a world in the United States, the famous anchor Walter Cronkite used to say every night, and that's the way it is. But to a lot of Americans, it wasn't the way it was, because he spoke for a monolithic institution that failed too many people. And those people can now speak, and I celebrate that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay. We are at the halfway mark of our debate, so let's reset. We are here at the Kitchener Public Library as part of our TVO Today live series. Our debate question tonight, are social media undermining democracy? If you've joined us late, let's reintroduce our panelists. On the yes side, Samantha Bradshaw, American University School of International Service and a fellow at CG, the Center for International Governance Innovation. And Anne Fitz-Gerald, director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs and a professor of political science at Wilfred Laurier University. Arguing for the no side, Robbie Suave, senior editor, Reason Magazine, a host on Hill TV and author of Tech Panic, Why We Shouldn't Fear Facebook and the Future. And Jeff Jarvis, director of the Town Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the City University of New York's Newmark School of Journalism. Okay. We've done 2 rounds. Let's now go to round 3. And round 3 is going to feature a question from me to each of you, and you will get 2 minutes to respond, and your opposite side will get 2 minutes to rebut as well. And let's go in inverse order from the way we've been going. So, Jeff, you get the first question, and here we go. Would the Arab Spring or Black Lives Matter movements have been possible without social media? 2 minutes.
Let's be very clear that the Arab Spring was no Twitter revolution. It was a revolution of brave people who stood out there. Also, Black Lives Matter was a movement that came together in part because certainly of social media, because we saw the murder of George Floyd on Facebook, because we had witnesses who could now share with the world what media were not sharing. So yes, there is a catalytic effect there, but I'm not a technological determinist. I don't believe that this sets in motion things that can't be stopped. And I also think it's very important to note that the Arab Spring, of course, didn't change everything permanently. That's because change is hard. That's because you can't just simply think that it started or it continues only because of what occurs in social media or online or with a new technology. This happened with print as well. We saw, of course, that I don't think that print caused the Reformation, but without print, without Luther printing his theses, I don't think we would have seen the Reformation that we had. And what is that equivalent today? I'm not sure. But what if Black Lives Matter is the racial reformation we've been waiting for? What if January 6th is the Counter-Reformation from the old white people who don't want to be taken over? And I think that we have to examine that conflict in our society. And as Robbie said, we welcome the discussion. Democracy is discussion. Democracy is debate. We fooled ourselves for years, for generations, into thinking that we could be homogenized into a pretty picture that that's the way it is, when it wasn't. And so what we hear now in this world is a truer sense of our society. And it's not pretty, as Robbie said. It can be bad. It can be ugly. But we've got to deal with that. And if we continue to blind ourselves into thinking that we can just fix our problems in society by blaming it all on Mark Zuckerberg as a folk devil, then we're fooling ourselves.
Jeff, thank you very much. Now, the yes side has an opportunity to rebut for 2 minutes, and you can share the time. One of you can respond for the yes side, however you like. Over to you guys, 2 minutes.
Yep. Great. This is a really great question. You know, I think when we're looking at the role of mobilization and democracy and the role of social media and all of that, if you look at the Arab Spring, all the countries but Tunisia who underwent revolutions are now in a worse state of democracy than when they started. And this is because dictators have learned to use the affordances of social media platforms to surveil, to suppress, to silence, to arrest and imprison journalists and activists and the brave people on the ground who were fighting for their rights. So while mobilization is great and good and a very important element of democracy, there are greater powers at play here, and we need to think deeply about the way these technologies can facilitate those kinds of harms and attacks against democracy.
Thanks, Sam. Jeff, you talk about the Arab Spring. A lot of people, not surprisingly, refer to the Arab Spring as the good old days. The good old days with social media before technological progression went like this and took a quantum leap. So it has to do with the rapidity and the scalability of which social media and the technology underpinning it has moved ahead with, and with such a pace that policy is lagging grossly behind. Not just policy, but education as well, because this requires a totally multidisciplinary skill set and set of competencies. And our education systems haven't caught up to produce the right people to write legislation on this, policy on this. So I do think the panic button has been long pressed. I do think there's been ample research done by many research institutes that has signaled the panic button.
Thank you very much, Ann, and actually, stay alive because you've got the next question coming to you. Here's the question for Ann Fitz-Gerald. Is it undemocratic for governments to impose controls on social media? 2 minutes.
Well, I think governments have, to a certain extent, always imposed controls on internet platform companies or social media platform companies and their participants. There are a number of examples: privacy laws, intellectual property laws, and even criminal laws like the banning of child pornography have all been laws and regulations that companies have had to abide by. So no, it is not undemocratic, but it can be in certain situations. And Sam mentioned some. I've worked in a number of countries where governments use fake news, new fake news laws and new social media laws to repress their people. They also use platforms like WhatsApp and others to try to put limitations that are illegal on their people. They expand the definition of words like terrorism so they can violate freedom of the press and imprison members of the investigative media world. So there are times when this is used undemocratically. But there is a role for government, in part. It's not the only entity that has to play a role here, but you could flip it on, the issue on its head and say, if not the government, who? Now, I would say that in the history of Western democracies, there has never been complete freedom of speech without recourse, nor have we tolerated abuse. Pre-internet, we had freedoms and responsibilities and a balance between these. The advent of the internet sort of upended that balance a little bit, and we're looking to restore the balance again. So democratic systems require a balance between freedoms and responsibilities. If not, it leads to anarchy. The people stand up and demand rule of law, and I think that's probably where we are now.
Anne, thank you very much. The no side now can split its 2 minutes as it likes.
So I would not take the position that there should be no rules on social media. There are some exceptions to free speech, even US side for the First Amendment. There are a couple areas of the law where we might need new legislation. If you buy my book, which is available in the back, for instance, I do say revenge porn, there should be new laws around that to guard against this reality. But overall, I would say that democracy would not be enhanced or made better by having more constraints on social media, especially more government-induced constraints. The social media companies are well within their rights to innovate and come up with better moderation policies. They do engage in moderation, not moderation at the behest of government always, but sometimes moderation policies that they come up with. All the things you just heard, I agree with a lot of them. The constraints need to be on the government. Government actors doing all sorts of bad things to make your speech more difficult on social media. I think that's an argument for our side. Social media is a threat to bad government actors and bad media actors and all sorts of people, which is why they're desperate to put constraints on it. I mean, even if you honestly think that government should do more to regulate social media, listen to a hearing, at least in the US. Maybe the education is better here. Listen to government politicians and bureaucrats grill Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and all the rest. They have no idea about any of this technology. They're ignorant. They cannot be trusted to constrain your speech on social media.
I would add that we see the talk about trying to ban TikTok in the US, which I find offensive to my soul because it is xenophobia coming to try to blame TikTok. The data on security is not really there. There's allegedly 150 million, fine, discount that. 100 million Americans who are on there, young people who have their voice. Are we really going to try to shut them up? Well, Utah is, I mentioned earlier, they have a law just signed that's going to require everyone, if you were all living in Utah, you would all have to prove your age to be over 18 to use the internet. You would all be chilled, and you'd be required to police your children. That's not what government should be doing.
Very good, Jeff, thank you very much. Robbie, you get the next question, and it is, because they became havens for bizarre conspiracy theories, did social media weaken social cohesion during the pandemic?
I think there's two parts to this. First, we talk a lot, it's related to this question about the harms to young people of social media. Thank God for social media during the pandemic. Young people cut off from all their socialization, from school, from activities, from extracurricular things, depression off the charts. It's not because they're on their phones too much. They had nothing else to do. Thank goodness they had a way to remain in touch with friends. It wasn't perfect. I didn't like it at all. I wanted to get back out there and socialize, but thank goodness for Zoom, Instagram, everything else that we use to stay in touch. I think that aspect of it, social media, was a tremendous positive. I can't imagine going through the pandemic without it. That would not have been good for social cohesion. The other component of the question, well, sure, promoting social cohesion, I would say, is not necessarily compatible with democracy in all cases. You can have a very fractured, very angry, very riled up citizenry that is correctly animated about injustice and bad policies and is upset is at war with itself in the battle of ideas for trying to come up with better policies for our society. So yes, the debate was very fractious on social media during the pandemic. I would say that A lot of conversations you ought to have been able to have about COVID, it was good that there were some ways to get around official channels. I mean, the government experts changed their minds a lot about what you should be able to say and what was the right thing to think. The consensus coming from government scientists on masks changed 800 times. At first, they said, don't bother. Then they said, no, absolutely, any mask, just get a mask, put one on. Then they said, well, not the cloth mask that 95% of people have been wearing. That's not doing anything. Get a really good mask. Imagine if there were rules, and there were, by the way, there were some of these rules on social media because government forced them on them. Government agents, at least in the US, told social media companies over and over again, we want you to prohibit anyone from saying X, Y, Z. But a lot of those things, X became more confusing than it was initially. I think maybe it undermined social cohesion. I don't think that's inconsistent with democracy, and I'm glad we were able to say what we were allowed to say on social media during that time.
Thank you, Robbie. The yes team now has an opportunity to rebut. Divide the 2 minutes as you like.
Yeah, I can do this.
All right. So we're never going to be able to regulate the whole internet, but what I think we should aspire to do is to try to find a balance that has developed some gold standard for some part of the internet and encourage users to locate their material in this more accountable area. And over time, this is going to take change. It's going to take this culture of responsible technology to develop. So I think there's a role here for both government and society. Government is a manifestation of the people. So this is a multi-stakeholder solution and approach that needs to be used. And don't forget, in some cases, we do give up our individual rights to put our trust in government to carry out specific roles, such as the monopoly on the use of violence. We put our trust in government and specifically in our security institutions to carry out that role. If we didn't, there would be anarchy. So, Sam, I'll let you come in and pick it up.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Just on the first half of the question, too, around teenagers on social media, I think there's some fabulous research from the field of social neuroscience that looks at the development of brains and teenage brains and adult brains and how the actual physiology of our brains evolve as we grow. And teenage brains aren't fully developed. They're much more susceptible to be driven by dopamine, and their emotional regulation isn't at the level of an adult brain. And so when they're on social media, there is a physiological limitation that can encourage addiction, depression, jealousy, aggression, and all kinds of other social harms. So just to touch on that one point.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay, and now you get the next question, Samantha, as well, and that is sowing discontent on social media more dangerous than meddling in elections?
Great.
2 minutes on that.
Thanks for the question. I don't think that discontent is incongruous with democracy. In a way, all activists are aggregators. Agitators, and voicing grievances is actually what leads to change. But what's really problematic is the way that social media and their technologies can enable bad actors to meddle with the processes of elections, but also democracy more broadly. I don't think democracy is something that starts and ends with the ballot box. It's a process, and we have to think about the various stages and steps of democracy. So while it's unclear that Russian interference during the 2016 US presidential election actually changed people's minds about who to vote for, Russian operatives did successfully organize more than 60 protests around the United States, mobilizing citizens to show up at events and rallies that further entrenched polarization. And while amplifying some voices, they also silenced others. My own research that looks at the gender dimensions of foreign influence operations has showed that targeted harassment by Russian operatives led female feminist activist leaders to engage less, to participate less. They were unable to generate the cohesion, the collective identity with their movements to continue their efforts in mobilization. These are real measurable effects that have degrading that have degraded our democracy beyond just changing people's minds around who to vote for. So what I think is really important about this question is how bad actors have been given this new ability to interfere with the processes that make our democracy work.
Thank you, Samantha. And Team No, divide your 2 minutes as you like and rebut what you just heard.
I just want to briefly note here that I think we've just seen an example of how social media and discussion and dialogue work, because I've heard Robbie and Samantha agree that some level of social disconnection is part of what democracy is about and part of what we have to grapple with. So the discussion is good, why shut it off?
Yeah, I mean, organizing protests is part of democracy. We don't have to like their aims. Find me an activist group that says a group around any issue on any side of the political spectrum, and ask them whether social media has made it easier or harder for them to get their message out. They'll invariably say easier. The professor pointed out internationally, it's true domestically as well. I think the children part of this is interesting too. I don't know about teenagers' brains. They take a long time to develop. I trust the research, I guess, but is it true of books? Where does it end where we have to shut them off from engaging with society? What is the age at which we're finally going to let people be adults and learn? I mean, there's a conversation right now that's aimed at people on both sides of the political spectrum want to not give kids access to the internet until they're 16. Aren't they supposed to be writing college essays by then? I mean, most young people are getting their news from social media. And by the way, the problem of sharing fake news, of engaging with fake news on social media, it is a problem of the elderly, universally, 100%. It's the professor up here. It's all your fault. Young people do not fall for this thing. They are, I hear all these, I see panels where the people on them are so worked up about young people falling for misinformation. I'm like, it's you people, it's not the young people. The studies show they don't struggle with this. They are using social media to become more knowledgeable, to encounter different sources of information, and to engage with their friends. Some of them use it too much. I think mom and dad should take the phone away before they go to bed, just like my own mother would only let me play an hour of video games a day. If I could allow to play them 24 hours a day, I would have been depressed and sad and anxious, sure. There's a room for parents and all sorts of voluntary moderation. We don't need the government's help.
And just for the record, he's got a little bit of white hair, but that does not make him elderly. Let's just get that on the record. I think we should give a nice encouraging round of applause for the first 3 rounds of how we're doing here tonight. This has been a marvelous debate, but we are now down to the short strokes. This is round 4, the final round. We will give you up to a minute and a half each, up to make your last pitch to convince the audience of the rightness and righteousness of your side of the debate. And to that end, we're going to start with Ann Fitz-Gerald.
Great. Well, I agree with Jeff and Robbie on 2 points. So, Jeff, I agree with you that debate discussion is so important and produces the best policy outcomes, but it needs to involve authentic voices and not inauthentic voices. Robbie, I agree with you that young people are the savvy ones, and they're the next generation, and they're the next generation of leaders as well. So let's work together, draw a balance between society and government, the manifestation of the people, to let these people, and doing it collectively, produce a better standard for the internet and channel over time most of the content in that direction. Robbie, you talked about the printing press. It brought a new form of communication. We had to rebalance then. We need to rebalance now. Free speech is a great thing to have, but free speech without checks and balances undermines the value of all speech. In light of these points, I would encourage you all to vote yes, not only because of the points that I've just raised, but also in defense of our commons, our institution, and our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Jeff Jarvis, minute and a half to you.
I would urge us all to take a deep breath. The hubris of the present tense is that we think that our time is so special, and it's never been like this before. But in studying about Gutenberg and the transition into the age of print, I see so many parallels to what the lessons that had to be learned then. The first reflex was to say, oh my God, we have to stop this. It's too much for people's brains. It's damaging to society. It caused, one would argue, a few 30 years wars and peasant wars. Where are we now? We are only about a quarter century away from the introduction of the browser to us all. That is to say, what I think of as the popular web. That puts us at about the year 1480 in Gutenberg time. And it's to say that we have time. And I urge you not to panic and not to think, my God, something must be done. We have to do something. I didn't mind to break the furniture here. Something must be done, and we have to change this immediately. That, too, is hubris, to think that we know what the internet even is yet. We don't know what it is. We still look at the future and the analog of the past, and we think of it as media and print and text, and it's something special our children have barely begun to explore. So please, I beg you, let them explore, let them learn, let them build their future, and please vote on our side.
Jeff, thank you. Samantha, up to you.
Great. Do we really want our digital future to be one that's built on hate, where conspiracy theorists, far-right extremists can mobilize for hate on social media with no recourse? I really think that, yes, of course, at the end of the day, people are a part of this problem. Like our opponent said, racism, sexism, xenophobia, they didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't come out of technology. But it is the technology that is amplifying and reinforcing a lot of these harms. It's not fair to put it on you, the people, to fact check all of this away, to become more media literate, especially when there are these large systemic forces based on the algorithms and the business models and the practices of private companies who do not have your interest, but are shaping the news, the information that you come across, the people you interact with, every aspect of your daily life, from interpersonal communication to who can start a business and who can fundraise, who can set up a GoFundMe page. These are really, really important questions, and we can't take social media and technology out of it. Though, yes.
Thank you, Samantha. Robbie, you get the last word tonight.
I mean, it's partly a philosophical question. Who gets to decide what's a conspiracy? Who gets to decide what's hate speech? In Martin Luther's time, saying that the earth was not the center of the universe was hate speech. Hate speech for the medieval church was a whole different thing. Free people have to make these choices, and the question is, does, in a democracy, social media facilitate us better making these choices, or would we be better off constraining it? And I think the obvious answer is that we should not constrain it. Let's think through a little bit what constraining it does involve. In fact, the massive distrust in America, in the US, among people on the right of institutions is largely driven by trying to constrain social media in a way that backfired and was not well advised. The censorship of the New York Post laptop story, if you're familiar with this, it was a story in the New York Post about Hunter Biden based on this laptop. He'd left at a computer repair shop, and it was supposed to malign the Bidens or whatever. Because the current and former law enforcement, national security experts, and the mainstream media said this was Russian disinformation, and it was censored, it was suppressed on Facebook and Twitter on that push from government and traditional media actors. It turned out that whatever conclusions you want to draw from it, the underlying information was not disinformation. It was a true laptop. The information was real. Efforts to suppress it have made the right wildly distrustful of the very institutions we're trying to defend. It's a textbook case of people, we can't trust the authorities and the institutions to judge, in all cases, conspiracy, hate, violence, et cetera. We have to let it out there so we get to decide.
Very good. I'm going to join you all now on stage in order to do the death-defying last act of this play tonight. And that is, the first thing we have to do, I think, is, I know you know this, but you do know how tough it is to make cogent arguments up here with a clock staring you in the face and be so brilliant. So how about a hand for our 4 debaters tonight? That's number one. And now it's time for you to have the final say. You all voted when you got in here. Take your smartphones out right now, actually, and call up that QR code that we provided earlier. And if you like what this side of the room had to say, vote yes. If you liked what this side of the room had to say, vote no on the question of whether social media are or are not undermining our democracy. And while we take a couple of minutes here for you to vote, let me use this opportunity to do just a few thank yous for the day we've had here in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. We certainly want to start by thanking the staff here at the Kitchener Public Library. We started off the morning with Pokeroo, as we always do. Pokeroo's birthday, we had a lot of fun together, all in the name of learning. So to Mary and the staff here at Kitchener Public Library, bravo. We want to thank our TVO team and the crew for making this all come together so seamlessly. Mark Ford is our technical director. Without Mark, there's no broadcast. So Mark, thank you so much. If you ever watch the agenda, you will know that I have a very close personal relationship with Sheldon Osmond, our director, whom I speak to during the show. He's directing tonight. Sheldon, to you and the crew, thank you so much. I want to thank Sandra Jonas, who dedicated her editorial skills to tonight's broadcast. She's in charge of the editorial side of TVO Today Live. We've done some wonderful broadcasts together. Bob Woodward in Toronto a couple of months ago. This one tonight, we'll keep it going. Sandra, well done to you and thank you. And I really have to do a special shout out here to the guy whose name is on the Wilson Foundation, which has provided the funding for TVO Today Live. I first met Red Wilson, I guess about 4 decades ago. He was a deputy minister at Queen's Park, and we've known each other a long time. And he's done very well in life, and he is doing great things because he has done so well. He's giving all his money away. He's giving away millions in hopes of making the world a better place. We are delighted that he sees in these efforts an attempt by us to engage on issues around democracy, and we are really grateful that he thinks that this mission of ours is worth supporting. So Red Wilson, thank you so much for your patronage of this as well. And finally, I'm going to ask you to do it one more time for Samantha Bradshaw, Ann Fitz-Gerald, Robbie Suave, and Jeff Jarvis. Great job tonight, you four. Thank you very much. And I'm pretty sure Robbie mentioned the fact that he just might have some books for sale afterwards at the back of the hall. Wordsworth Books, great local bookseller. They are here. You can get a signed copy of Robbie's book, Tech Panic, Why We Shouldn't Fear Facebook in the Future, among other related titles at the back of the room. Okay, let us remind everybody of how our evening started. This side had a big advantage starting the evening. 74% of you voted yes, that social media was ruining democracy. Only 26% of you said no. Now we've had a chance to have you vote a second time, having heard the debate, and let's see what the numbers are now. Can we bring the new numbers up? Post-debate, 60% say yes, 40% say no. You folks moved more votes. Fist pump over here on this side. Well done, everybody. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we never win.
We
this.
never win these.
We never win these. We're the unpopular ones.
You guys need to come to Canada more often. We are a kinder, gentler place. Hey, that's it for us. From the Kitchener Public Library, I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for joining us tonight on TVO. Until next time, good night, everybody.
TVO Today Live is made possible by the generous support of the Wilson Foundation.